Okay, well, welcome everyone to How We Rise, the Benefits of Gender Diversity in Our Economic Recovery. My name is Sue Tomney, and I am the CEO of YW Calgary. Before we begin, recognizing we are all joining virtually and in different places, I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Mscabi-Piikani. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta and Turtle Island. We are all treaty people. For over 100 years, the Banff, Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge YWCAs have been working together to advance gender equity in our province. Together, we support over 30,000 Albertans every year with a variety of employment and social services and employ over 650 people in total. All of us have remained operational throughout the pandemic, and we've been able to do that with your support. So for that, I thank you. Economic recovery is top of mind for me as a mother and a friend and a CEO. My employees are juggling full-time work and homeschooling while simultaneously working hard to deliver safe housing, mental health support, and childcare for Calgary families. My children are recent grads trying to figure out where they fit in our transforming economy. I'm left wondering, how can we create workplaces that attract and keep women and gender diverse folks? How can we change the narrative that only certain kinds of jobs are valued in our province? Today, we have a timely panel to kick off 2021. We hope it will catalyze the conversation on the inclusion of women and gender diverse people in our economy. A few statistics about the benefits of gender diversity at work. A business with a gender diverse executive team is 25% more likely to be profitable. An equitably paid Alberta workplace could result in an additional $1.2 billion in income tax revenues. And according to the Bank of Canada, a recovery that is inclusive is more likely to be successful and to last longer. There are, however, a few challenges. Pre-COVID in Alberta, women earned 68 cents dollars that's earned by a man on the dollar. That's considerably less than the national average. Why is that? As of December 2020, 195,000 fewer women were employed in Alberta than men. Racialized and LGBTQ2S+ folks remain vulnerable in our economic downturn. And the lack of good data prevents us from understanding the impact the pandemic and economic slowdown has had on them. And the challenge of childcare remains a financial barrier to allowing women and gender diverse people to engage in the workforce. The opportunity today is to learn about the lift that we can bring to economic recovery through more gender diversity. We are pleased to host this event in partnership with the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to also welcome Bow Valley, Edmonton, and Lethbridge Chamber members who are joining us here today. I'd also like to acknowledge some special guests in our audience today, the Honorable Minister of Jobs and Immigration for Alberta, Jason Copping, MLA Rocky Pancholi, and MLA Janice Irwin. Thank you all for your service. Our panel moderator today is Lara Murphy, co-founder of Ryan Murphy Construction, my boss as YW Calgary Board Chair, and also Calgary Chamber Board member. Audience members can post questions in the Q&A box, and you're encouraged to upload questions for the lightning round later on. So now I'd like to pass it over to Calgary Chamber of Commerce Interim CEO, Murray Ziegler, for some remarks. Murray?
Thank you, Sue, for the warm welcome. I'm pleased to be here today as interim CEO of the Calgary Chamber. Indeed, the Chamber is proud to be partnering with the YWCAs of Alberta to host this important and timely conversation on the benefits of gender diversity in economic recovery. I'd like to echo Sue's acknowledgement that today's event is taking place on the traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. We are grateful to work and live upon this territory together, and we value our collective sense of belonging and deep history. Before I turn the virtual podium over, I'd like to briefly share why it was important for the Chamber to partner with the YWCAs of Alberta on today's event. At the Chamber, we believe that Calgary's future and Alberta's future is one where all individuals can participate in business. It is through inclusion that we can grow our economy, and that means leveling the playing field and allowing the benefits of that growth to reach all citizens, particularly those who have been historically excluded or held back. Emerging evidence is showing us that the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are being felt more acutely by certain segments of the population, and especially based on gender. We have a unique opportunity to put in place policies that remedy the many structural economic disadvantages that occur due to gender. I'm greatly forward to today's conversation, which will dive right into this opportunity, and our chamber is totally committed to partner with the overall community, especially the great efforts of YWCAs to help move the agenda along with some sense of urgency in its advocacy and working together cooperatively. It is now my pleasure to introduce and turn the virtual stage over to Lara Murphy. Lara is co-founder of Ryan Murphy Construction, which she founded together with Karen Ryan in 2008. Ryan Murphy Construction offers construction, renovation, and project management services in a highly approachable, transparent, and responsive way. Lara began her professional career in Atlantic Canada after graduating from Mount Allison University. She first owned a heritage restoration company, and from there founded and ran multiple businesses within the construction industry. Lara is the board chair of YW Calgary, and we're also very lucky to have her as a board director at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. Lara, over to you.
Thank you, Murray, for the kind words and, of course, for the Chamber support. It takes all members of civil society to get things better. Hi, everyone. I'm Lara. I'm pleased to moderate this exciting panel today. And as an entrepreneur myself and an advocate for gender diversity, this topic is very close to my heart. Economic recovery certainly binds us all in these challenging times, and I see firsthand many of the challenges our communities are facing when we wrestle with inclusion and prosperity. And that's why I'm so pleased to introduce our panel of experts today. And I'm sure after hearing from them, you'll become fans of their big brains, just as I have. I'd like to start by introducing Carrie Freestone, she, her. Carrie is an economist at RBC, provides labor market analysis at RBC Economics through the gender lens. Most recently, producing insights on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on women's labor force outcomes. Carrie is also a member of the Regional Analysis Group, contributing to the outlook of provincial economies. Carrie holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors in economics from Queen's and a Master of Arts in Economics from the University of Ottawa. Welcome, Carrie, and thank you so much for joining us from Ontario today. Next up, we have Wendy Muse, she, her. Wendy is a serial entrepreneur and feels most comfortable trying to solve entrepreneurial barriers. Wendy has been a part of a team that took an idea, only a $100,000 investment, and turned it into a $121 million publicly traded company in just 18 months. Wendy's a previver who is currently working on a project to help reduce barriers for women that are impacted by breast cancer called Breast Buds. Carrie, I can't wait to hear your perspective shortly. And finally, Marian Guyad, she, her. Marian is the Vice President, External Relations and Partnerships at Norquest College. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, a Bachelor of Commerce and Marketing and an MBA from the U of A. In her role at Norquest, Marion holds responsibility for continuing education, contract training, and Norquest International Advancement and Government Relations. She's the executive sponsor of Norquest Anti-Racism and Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiatives. Very much looking forward to hearing from you, Marion, and how women and gender diverse people can lead our economic recovery. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm excited to get started. So to launch things off today, I'll be pleased to introduce Carrie, and she will go ahead and share the current state of the women and gender diverse people in Alberta's workforce. So Carrie, over to you.
Thanks so much for having me today. So I'm an economist at RBC, as we mentioned previously, and over the course of, I guess, going on a year now, we've been tracking quite closely the labor force outcomes of women and minorities in Canada. And so essentially, this kind of developed into two separate reports, one that we put out in the summer and one that we put out in the fall. And they got quite a bit of attention because we were realizing that women's labor force outcomes were significantly different than men's, and that this recession was looking quite different. So I'm going to go ahead and explain how this pandemic is different than previous pandemics and sort of look at the evolution so far. So essentially, from February to April, we saw employment in Canada fall 16%, and that is 8 times the magnitude of the hit to labor markets that we saw during the Great Recession. So we are ultimately witnessing an unprecedented hit to labor markets here in Canada, something that we haven't seen since the Great Depression. And why is this different? Well, 3 million Canadians lost their jobs initially at the onset. And so far, we've actually experienced a pretty robust recovery. 2.3 million Canadians have found employment, but nevertheless, we still have a long way to go. Alberta actually isn't expected to fully recover until 2023. So something that's unique with this particular pandemic is how we've seen it affect women's participation. So nationally in Canada, women's participation hit the lowest level that it had been in 30 years, and this happened in April. And at the same time, Alberta's participation for women, that rate fell to the lowest level that we've seen in 40 years. So now we have seen some improvement, but as of December, which is the latest available that we have, the latest data that we have available to us, women's participation in Alberta is still at the lowest level that we've seen since 1992. And this is quite concerning because this means that in a short period of time, we have to make up 30 years worth of women's gains. And so, I mean, why does it matter? Why do we care that women's participation should be equal to men's? Well, if we want to monetize it, every year in Canada, nationally, that women's participation is not equal to men's, it costs our economy over $100 billion. So when women's participation is not equal to men's, it's not just a detriment to women, it affects men as well. It affects all of us through standard of living and through Canadian prosperity. So by low women's participation rate, what that trend is telling us is that women are losing their jobs, or women are opting to take a break from work, and they are at home and they aren't actively seeking work. So they're not participating and they're not looking for employment. So essentially, I'm just going to get into sort of how this developed and how this is different than previous recessions. So early on in the pandemic, women were actually the first to lose their jobs. And we started looking at the data in March, and we noticed this, that women represented a significant share of job losses early on. And that was because women account for quite a significant share of industries that are high contact, industries that are disrupted by these global health restrictions and these closures. So those are industries such as accommodation and food services. And in fact, women in Alberta have accounted for 60% of job losses in that industry. And that is the hardest hit industry in the province and nationally as well. But then we also look at industries like retail sales, and we see that women account for a large share of that industry as well. And that's an industry that's significantly hit harder than other industries, and it's one that will be out for longer. Now, in April, we did begin to see male-dominated industries impacted as well. So men in manufacturing and construction started to lose their jobs. But then in May and June, we saw men return to employment sooner than women. So far, as of December, roughly 71% of women's positions in Alberta have been recovered, but that means that we still have quite a ways to go. Another trend that was concerning that we wrote about in our reports last year was essentially that women were falling out of the labor force. So the size of the labor force for women has actually contracted throughout the pandemic. So it's gotten smaller, whereas at the same time, the size of the labor force for men has gotten bigger. So men are coming in and are looking for work and women are not. One other thing that's worth identifying here and acknowledging is the fact that this pandemic is sort of, it's kind of exacerbated pre-existing labor market ailments. So sort of inequalities that were already present in the labor market are exacerbated and are obviously highlighted by this pandemic. So one thing is that parents were more likely to fall out of the labor force. So in March and April, when we saw school closures, we saw the size of the labor force for parents with children under 13, we saw it shrink by 5%. But interestingly enough, in August and September, as children nationally were heading back to school, we saw parents return to work. In addition to that, we're seeing that women on the fringes of the labor market are impacted more significantly than prime age workers. So young women aged 20 to 24 who are just graduating, these women in particular faced a significant share of job losses. And those women in that particular age group, they faced more significant shares of job losses than men in the same age group. We've also noticed a much choppier recovery among women who earn less than $800 a week, whereas women who are in higher wage brackets have actually benefited and gained positions. So it's been very unequal. We saw some jobs created in tech this year, and a lot of young professional women under 40 have realized those gains. But at the same time, these women in the lower wage brackets, these women are being left behind. We noticed that women with degrees are gaining jobs, while women who might not have access to university education, those women are losing jobs throughout the pandemic. And lastly, I want to emphasize that we've noticed that the recovery has been slower for visible minorities and also women who identify as Indigenous. So women who are non-minorities or who don't identify as visible minorities or are non-Indigenous, those women are recovering faster and finding jobs. So the question that I want to ask and what I want to leave you thinking about today is it enough for us to go back to where we were in 2019? So 2019, we're aware that that's pre-pandemic levels and that's kind of the goal. But I mean, we were still in a society that was largely unequal. And if we want to recover fully, we need everybody to participate. So it's worth thinking about how we can ramp this up and get more women in the labor market participating. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carrie. Really informative and actually rather shocking when you look at a lot of the statistics. I think of one, it's the 30 years of advancement that we've seemed to have lost during this pandemic. So there's a lot of work to be done, and certainly we'll look forward to hearing more about the perspectives from the panel today. And I just wanted to remind everyone on the webinar today that we will be taking audience questions after the panel discussion. So add your questions to the Q&A box and you can vote the question up and we'll be able to see the most popular, and then we'll have a chance for the panelists to respond to those questions. So I'd like to propose a question for all the panelists. We'll get things going. And we'll start with, what is the game-changing impact of gender diversity to Alberta's economic recovery? Marion, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. And really happy to be joining you today, and greetings from Edmonton. I want to build a little bit on what Carrie was saying in terms of the numbers. And I think in terms of game-changing impact for me, it's really about untapped potential. Women, and more specifically, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and gender diverse people are an incredible, untapped, underdeveloped resource in the provincial economy. And to use a very Alberta metaphor, if you will, it's like having a prime oil resource that everyone knows is there and no one is putting the work to tap into it. Actively including women in economic recovery in a very intentional way, especially on the small business and entrepreneurship side, will really drive Alberta forward as a more equitable and sustainable economy that could really weather future downturns in a more resilient way. And we know that the argument has been made and the evidence has shown diversity and inclusive practices create more innovative, hyper-competitive nations and institutions. And we all know how much the pandemic has had in terms of impact on the entirety of our economy. But we do have an opportunity now to not just fall back into old habits of the past. The pandemic accelerated such amazing things like working from home and embracing flexible work style. And for many years, women have been asking for that in the workplace. And now that employers see the value of this, I think this is something that we definitely need to continue. We also know that the pandemic has exposed a variety of inequities within policymaking at all levels of government. As previously mentioned, when schools and daycares closed, women with younger children bore the brunt of the increased labor force, and created scenarios where many of these women felt like they needed to choose between taking care of their loved ones and their job. And so they exited the labor force, and that's not good for us. My hope coming out of COVID and the pandemic, because these inequities were exposed and brought into public discourse and conversations like what we're having today, that governments at all levels take a more intersectional lens to policymaking. I was reading this report coming out of the Royal Society of Canada titled Renewing the Social Contract, Economic Recovery in Canada from COVID-19. And one of their recommendations for improving crisis policy response is for policymakers to develop and disseminate an intersectional approach to policy development and analysis to provide decision makers with a more accurate and comprehensive picture of problems and the potential benefits and costs of solutions, and how these could potentially be distributed and redistributed across society, especially for marginalized groups and the ones that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. We also know that the value of education and lifelong learning is a key economic driver of advancing women, should be something as a central theme in economic recovery. We will need to design and build opportunities and supports to have women lead the future of work, increase participation in solving world problems in climate change, healthcare, technology innovation, and more. We know now from what we've experienced last year that making a leap and lasting change will need transformative investments. So imagine what this would mean. And to build on what Carrie said in terms of young professionals who have higher degrees being able to really gain opportunities within the workforce, imagine how much we could potentially invest in women in the STEM field and encouraging opportunities to help advance some of that as well. I will say that airing out things like women of the age of 20 to 24 being amongst the hardest hit cohorts of workers, and the fact that this could potentially be a group that's left behind, it really begs the question for us to think, how are we going to build back better? How are we going to use the lessons of the pandemic to move forward and consider transformational changes and build strategies and policies to keep women in the workforce and advance them in the workforce? This will only strengthen our province in the long term and drive future growth. I think we have a huge opportunity, and I'm very hopeful that we can create a more welcoming and inclusive experiences for women in the workforce. Diversity matters, equity pay matters, and certainly entrepreneurship matters. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Marion. That's amazing. So much to think about and consider. I know that crisis is the mother of all invention. So hopefully as a collective, we can move forward and push these initiatives. I wondered if Carrie, would you like to answer the question? I can certainly repeat it if you prefer.
No, that's okay. I'll just dive right in. So I want to go back to my $100 billion number, and I've seen a question in the Q&A where someone's asking for clarification as well. So I'll kill two birds with one stone here. So essentially, we did a calculation where we figured out on a national scale how much we're losing by having women's participation unequal to men. So we set women's participation rate equal to men's, and we figured out what the impact would be on GDP. And we found that nationally, it would be over $100 billion each year. So in 2019, it was actually 111 billion. So quite significant. And we are losing that every year that women are not participating equally. So I guess my argument for Alberta is sort of Alberta stands to lose a lot if women aren't participating. The one thing is, as obviously a provincial economist, I monitor Alberta's forecast, and Alberta is one of the provinces that is going to be the last to recover, largely because Alberta faced the double whammy of the oil price crash alongside this really unprecedented recession. And that means that Alberta's economy does not stand to recover until 2023, and that's output and employment levels. And, you know, we've seen obviously men be impacted in Alberta as well by the job losses in construction associated with oil and gas. And this is such a good opportunity to bring women in. I mean, we have a situation where we've got all these educated women. I actually read an article in the Calgary Herald the other day about young women graduating who are highly educated and who are leaving the province. And Alberta has one of the most highly educated workforces of young women. So I think that this is an opportunity to bring women in and have women sort of bridge the gap to and develop, I guess, clean energy, as well as diversify the economy. And we're in a situation too, I know that Marion mentioned this, that we're kind of in the middle of an experiment where we've proven ourselves. We're able to work from home, and we're able to do so productively. And as a young woman, I know that when I reach my childbearing years, this will benefit me, because I can say to my company, hey, I can work at home and I can still be productive and I can contribute. Whereas otherwise I might not have been able to do so. And think about how much that can benefit women. So now that we have this flexibility, there's no reason that we can't encourage women to enter and break down barriers for women. And my main argument is that, you know, if it's going to take Alberta till 2023 to recover, I mean, we can recover way faster if we include women and gender diverse individuals and visible minorities. If we include everyone and bring everyone to the table, we'll have all hands on deck and we can recover faster.
Oh, that's so true. It's such an important piece, Carrie, and those statistics, again, just thinking of 1 billion a year, and with Alberta in particular, it's it's mind-boggling. Wow, thank you for sharing. And Wendy, would you like to go next? I can repeat the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
No, I've got it. Thanks so much, Lara. I just want to say I'm very honored to be here, and I appreciate that we're working towards trying to bring solutions to things like this, and then we're having these open conversations around it. As an entrepreneur, I've spent the better part of my working life trying to find ways to improve my life. That's how I started at entrepreneurship. And I learned that education and entrepreneurship removed many of the barriers that I had faced in my early life to be able to become demonstrably more successful as I got older. And because of that experience, I wanted to be able to provide that to others. And so I've spent a lot of my time working on projects that actually very much speak to what we're talking about today, including I worked on a project in Wood Buffalo a couple of years ago that was related to gender diversity and inclusion in entrepreneurship, just noting that there are significant gaps. While Alberta does, it's disheartening to hear our participation numbers as a whole in our country at this point, but previous to the pandemic, Alberta reported the highest participation in female entrepreneurship in our country. And so it's important now more than ever that we continue to encourage and remove barriers for women. And sort of speaking to the point that Marion made around STEM, there are certainly efforts being made in our province to make big improvements in those areas. I work on a project in the Lethbridge region right now called WeSTEM that genuinely works to support to remove the barriers that exist for diverse communities, rural communities, and remote communities. And the outcomes that they're already seeing from it are incredible, and especially during COVID when people have this sort of remote issue that they're facing. I would say one further thing that really impacts rural communities during times like this and when there are economic downturns is we see changes in the home environment. And past research has shown that women's participation in entrepreneurship and success in entrepreneurship has led to improved economic outcomes, reduction in economic disparity, reduction in gender-based violence, and also increased civic community participation. So to Lara's point earlier, and I think Sue also mentioned at the beginning, that sort of participation from women will only it will only serve to improve our overall outcomes. And having women participate from diverse backgrounds with diverse experiences adds to the lens of what we can see is happening in all of our communities, not just those who currently have the loudest voices in our communities that are speaking out about it. And I think that's really important to remember that change made in a rural community, it's like a pebble in a pond. It has a much farther space to grow before it hits someone else to feel that impact. And rural communities work really hard to be inclusive so that everyone feels the impact when something changes or improves there. So I think focusing and continuing to focus on economic improvement through entrepreneurial and education pursuits for women will really help us to quickly turn around our current situation. And I just want to relay a story I had mentioned previously about in another group about how I saw this work. And so I was working with a lady who lived on a reserve that had an incredibly high unemployment rate. And many of the women on this reserve did beadworking, and they were selling it to make money. But one of the problems they ran into was it was hard to source beads in their remote community. And so one of these ladies took it upon herself to figure out how to source the beads so she could supply the beads to these other ladies, creating prosperity through those ladies. And she herself now does almost $100,000 business selling beads. All of this goes back into their community. And so just recognizing these small changes have larger impacts in these communities will help us to, I believe, turn around a lot of what we face in the coming years.
Thank you, Wendy. That's there's a lot to think about, and particularly that piece about remote work and remote communities. It's something that I know even for myself living in the city in Calgary, you can tend to forget about how those barriers are even further and more of an impediment. So thanks for bringing that story. It's inspiring to say the least. And thanks to all the panelists for all of the insight and the brilliant stories that you can share. It's a time of great learning for me, and I think for all of us. And we do have to look at not just the loudest voices, but the ones that need to be heard the most. And I'm excited to continue this journey with all of you. So on that note, we're sneaking up into the round of what they call lightning round. And I'll just open up the Q&A box and have a look at some of these questions. So we've got a few coming in, which I'm excited to look at. And so the audience has been submitting questions. So what we propose to do is basically during the lightning round, each of the panelists will have a chance to answer an audience question. And I will basically look at selecting, okay, here we go. So I will say this is probably best suited to Carrie, but certainly anyone feel free to jump in. In Alberta, female predominant jobs are lower paying and less valued in our economy. How are we going to change the perception that these jobs are critical and we must increase compensation in healthcare, long-term care, retail, hospitality? Which have we seen that are so vital to the quality of life through COVID? That is so true. Carrie, would you like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. I'll give it a start. Okay, so I'm just looking. I think what they're asking essentially is how are we changing the perception that the jobs that women are working in may be less critical, if I'm interpreting it correctly. And what I take from that is, I'm going to answer two of them, essentially, the wage question as well. But I think the reason women it's kind of self-fulfilling why women are paid less. So women are paid less because we can't afford to necessarily devote as many hours as men because we're stuck. Well, we're not stuck, but we're taking care of our children and we have other obligations at home. So essentially, women are often in these positions where we're not moving up as quickly because we have these obligations. But since we're able to work part-time, we will be more able to compete against males for these positions. And essentially, how are we going to change the perception that critical jobs in healthcare, long-term care, retail, and hospitality, the perception that they're worse jobs? I think there's definitely an argument to be made for better compensation and fair wages. And I know some people have gone as far to say unionization, and I mean, I haven't studied or costed this out particularly. So, but I would say definitely compensation is a key factor, and we've seen in the pandemic, like these jobs are the backbone of our economy, and you know, we've seen the arguments for paid sick days for women, and I think that there won't be any question after this COVID pandemic is over that women's positions in healthcare are the backbone. It is definitely a compensation.
Yes, that's so true, Carrie. Agree. Thank you so much, Jan, for the question. I have one from Jen Sanford. I think this may be suitable for Wendy. What specific tangible steps do we need to take to make it easier for women entrepreneurs to become economic drivers in this province?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks. Okay, I'm a practitioner of design thinking, and one of the things you do in design thinking is you actually go out and you ask women entrepreneurs what they need to be able to grow their businesses, rather than just individuals coming up with seem like logical ways to do it. And by asking people what gaps exist for them, we're better able to backfill with solutions for that. And I think an example of that is right now I'm legally disabled, and I'm an entrepreneur. And there were many barriers I faced when transitioning to working from home full time that other entrepreneurs wouldn't have faced. But there continues to not be a lot of resources available to help with that. And some of the resources that are available, I wouldn't really fit into that, the categories that are required. And so I think, again, we need to actually not broadly identify people as, for example, women need help. It's not just women, it's many genders that need help in our economic recovery. It's not just rural or urban, it's a diverse group. It's not just, it's BIPOC, non-BIPOC, it's a diverse group of people who need support in all these areas. And so I think a great way to find out what support they need is asking them and then creating responses based on that. And so my assumption would be learning more from them would be the first step to finding out how we can provide those resources, and that will lend to greater economic growth.
Oh, that's so true. Very, very true. And I think that this next question that we have, Marion, sort of a segue from what you've said, Wendy, it's what policies would you recommend citizens advocate for at the municipal level as we look and diversify into our workforce and entrepreneurship? And she's saying she loved Wendy's real world example. So any others that the panel can share? I'm just reading live, guys. This is what we have to do these days. So Mary, would you like to take a stab at that? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll combine my answer with that too, a little bit of what Wendy just started. You know, I always think around entrepreneurship, you got to follow where the investments have gone. Where's the money going? And currently 2% of venture capital investments are going towards female-led businesses. And I think there's a huge opportunity where we can look for ways to ensure that investments are going towards female-led businesses. And I think there is some policy implications around that, but I also think it has to come from the business community as well. Someone was telling me, a female entrepreneur actually based out of Calgary that I admire greatly, who shared with me a story around how there was a female entrepreneur who had a really great idea of how to do braids for Black women's hair. And she had pitched the idea to a number of VCs, and the VCs' responses were, well, my wife wouldn't use that. She doesn't know how to understand this or what we can capitalize on. And I think there is a huge lack of understanding of how we can create business out of diversity. And so the recommendation was, how do we build more diversity within the business community so that when these opportunities come to the table, we know when to fund them, how to fund them, and then amplify the voices of diversity. So I think there's lots of opportunity there. From a municipal perspective around policy, you know, I think the opportunities that chambers of commerce can play in this to create forums of exchange of ideas and maybe sort of a dragon's den approach to pitching and getting the right people in the room and investing in some experiments. I think that could go a long way in terms of shifting hearts and minds and see what may come out of it.
That's right. You know, that's so very true. And I know, do you have anything, Marion, that specifically that you feel organizations could do to make that change in terms of supporting the gender diversity piece?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that it's nice to have an equity, diversity, inclusion strategy within organizations, sort of a nice thing to have. But I think where we're going now is an EDI strategy must be a fundamental part of your business plans and a fundamental part of your organizational strategy, and you must invest in that. I know at Norquest we have the Colburn Institute for Inclusive Leadership, and the organizations that we work with to implement such strategies within their business plans with clear metrics and people engagement and creating equity within the systems within organizations have seen transformational change. And I think that's the opportunity that we have. And a community builds itself and a community supports itself. And so when you have organizations lead one another and lead their people differently, I think we could have really great collective success.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Marion. Now, I think we have time for another quick question. Are we doing okay? I think we're all right. So one other question that came in, Carrie, there's a couple of notes around your presentation, which is great. In Carrie's detailed presentation, there was a significant correlation to education as well as gender and employment and income. Any thoughts on how we might be able to move the needle by creating additional education opportunities and supports for women? I don't know if anyone, Carrie, if you want to take a try, or anyone else on the panel, we'll open this up.
Yeah, I can give it a shot. Okay, so additional educational opportunities for women. Certainly, I think obviously we need to create more scholarships. We need to create more opportunities for women from backgrounds where they're not necessarily coming from an educated background to have those opportunities as well. That's something that I could see. I don't know if anyone else wants to dive in.
I would also say, just in my experience, when I've seen women open businesses and start businesses, right away, one of the very first things they start to look to do is start to employ other folks. And so I think in terms of some of the educational opportunities we can provide, it's removing some of those barriers for resources in rural communities to get the same education availability to people in rural communities on things, again, like entrepreneurship, so that women do have the opportunity to grow, because it will not be insular. It won't just be that woman who grows. It tends to be the entire community that benefits as a result of it. And so I would hedge to say that if we put more effort into getting resources to rural communities around entrepreneurial engagement and education, we'll see improvement in overall employment.
Yeah,
I can add to that as well.
Please.
An opportunity. So I think two things could be quite valuable. One, from Carrie's presentation around women that are in industries that will take a little bit longer to bounce back, we might have a really great opportunity to do some reskilling and maybe shifting women into new industries and new sectors so that they can come back into the workforce a lot quicker. So I think that is a great opportunity for us. There's lots of programs out there in continuing education for reskilling, upskilling, where we can have an opportunity to have women switch careers for a short time and build new skills and all of that. I think that could be a great opportunity, and that will help support economic recovery for sure, because it will bring women back into the workforce a lot quicker than the sectors can bounce back. The other piece of this as well is, I think, within reimagining higher education, within the post-secondary environment of Alberta, there's a lot of really cool initiatives that are happening across the board at universities, colleges, and polytechnics to build pathways to higher education and to make those easier, where you can, through micro-credentialing opportunities, recognize experiences of women and their past learning into new programs and new ideas and new industries. So I think there's lots there in terms of laddering for education to provide these quick, rapid educational opportunities that will help advance women within the sectors they're interested in. So there's quite a few things there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I know, being in construction, I've seen so many of our team members pivot from a different career into working with us. And it's interesting to see how this overlay of the hybrid model after COVID will support that even further in many industries. So it's very exciting to me, and I think it will allow a lot more opportunity. And it's just a matter of us getting our head around how we need to think about that and move forward as a collective. So I have another quick question. I think we still have time. This is exciting. In Carrie's detailed presentation, there was a significant correlation to education and gender. I asked it. I'm ahead of the game. I have already done it. So I was going to pull in the childcare piece has come up in a few of the Q&A questions, how we tackle this, what we can do as a community, and what some advice might be around that, because it's a huge piece of gender diversity in the economy. So I just thought I'd put that out to the panelists. We're looking like we've got about 7 minutes left, so I'll open the floor up, and if anyone has anything they'd like to add, I would really be curious to hear it, as I'm sure everyone tuning in would be.
Can I jump in and just and even add to your question, Lara? Because something that we're seeing at YW Calgary in terms of childcare is a departure from, just like the workforce after COVID, the 8 to 5, and this is what's required. And so that level of flexibility and being able to have childcare, on demand might be pushing it. But I'd be interested to also open that up in terms of what our panelists have seen and suggestions, because so much of this is going to be around great ideas, right, on how we can test this, and just thoughts that you've seen or witnessed that you would say to a YW who's trying to reinvent childcare in many ways, and quality childcare, on what you would see as something that we should be considering.
Does anyone else,
Okay,
Carrie?
yeah, I'm happy to start if that's
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously we have argued for affordable childcare through various of our women's reports. And one of the things that's very obvious is I showed the chart where women who earned less than $800 a week were more likely to become unemployed. And so in particular, we know that we need affordable childcare policies that can benefit people within those wage brackets. And I just want to bring to your attention that obviously in the 90s, there was an affordable childcare policy act that was implemented in Quebec, and they found that it actually paid for itself. So over time, women's participation rate, I think it was the early 2000s, it absolutely skyrocketed because more women were able to afford childcare. And I believe it was only $1 or $2 a day per child. So I think that, I mean, I haven't costed it out, so I can't comment on the price of it, but I think, just something that's very affordable for a small number of dollars a day for individuals, that would be very beneficial. And I really like the recommendation for flexible hours, because since women are working, sometimes evenings, someone might work a Saturday instead of a Monday, then that's an amazing suggestion. And I think obviously making childcare accessible and affordable to everyone will pay for itself. So I'm definitely a firm advocate of that.
No, I would agree wholeheartedly, Carrie. Wendy?
Yeah, I would also say that a lot of the women entrepreneurs that I've worked with have actually pursued entrepreneurship because it gave them flexibility with childcare. And it also gave them the ability to pursue income for economic independence. And I think that I can honestly say, in my experience in the entrepreneurial world, most entrepreneurs work quite collaboratively and in service of one another. It's not nearly as competitive as I think Shark Tank or Dragon's Den makes it seem, but we tend to all work in service to one another. And I think that becomes quite clear when you look at organizations like District Ventures. I worked at a District Ventures here in Calgary for 2 years. And one of my largest gripes as a person raising no children, but doing a great job of raising a dog, was that I couldn't take my dog to work. And I couldn't take my dog to work because it was a child-friendly work environment. And so they wanted to reduce risk for kids. So kids were allowed to come in because moms were taking meetings. Moms needed stuff. And the rest of us in the office would watch your kids and help out with it and sort of support that process for women to move forward. And again, that's an initiative because Arlene Dickinson identified that when she was trying to grow her business, one of the biggest inhibitors of her being able to do things was finding someone for childcare. And so recognizing that that is a barrier. I don't know that there's like simple solutions to come for it, but I think that one of the greatest things I've learned as an entrepreneur is just to ask. So ask someone for help if you need help with your kids because you want to pursue something in entrepreneurship. Ask someone for help if you want to learn more about entrepreneurship. Ask someone for help when you need help. And today's a great day. It's Bell Just Talk Day, right? So it's a perfect example of just being able to reach out and ask for help. And I think women being able to look for support in entrepreneurship towards economic prosperity is a very logical thing for us to be asking for help for.
I love that, Wendy. And that is the number one thing I always give for advice is ask, ask, ask. And it's so true in any organization, learning, entrepreneur, for me, it's the number one thing. And I'll just say, if you ever would like to come to my office, you're more than welcome to bring your dog. So we're dog friendly. So there you go. We have a couple more minutes. So I thought we could just quickly, like 3 minutes to be exact, but would anyone like to comment on the potential benefit of universal basic income and how that might encourage gender diversity in the workplace? No one's saying much. I did read a study from the Atlantic provinces that I believe it was focused in Prince Edward Island that talked about a lot of what they thought would be this carnage because of the work, lack of work. But when people were given even the meager $2,000 a month, that it actually allowed them to go back and do that course, finish their GED, take time and organize their lives. And they're actually created the opposite to what they expected. I believe it was in Maclean's magazine article. So it's a fascinating piece that I think we'll probably end up talking about more and more as things move forward. On that note, we're just a couple minutes out, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much. I could talk for hours. I know Wendy had talked about the mullet outfit where we're all suits on the top, but party on the bottom, because I was sharing, I had my Roots sweatpants on today. So we just really, really enjoy this. And I think more and more all of us, as we come together virtually, just really have to embrace this. And I just wanted to say thanks to Carrie from Ontario for joining in. So insightful and so much to think about. Marion as well, and Wendy, thank you. And thanks to Sue and the YW teams across Alberta. And also, of course, the Chamber of Commerce. I enjoy this so much. I'm so passionate about this topic. And I'm here, certainly if there's anything anyone ever like to ask me, just feel free. I'm not too hard to find. So thank you very much for the participation and all the enthusiasm. I'll pass it back over to Sue.
Okay, well, I too want to thank our panelists, Carrie, Wendy, and Marion, and of course you, Lara. You rocked it as our moderator. You always make everything so warm and engaging, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'd like to also thank everyone who's partnered and planned and brought this event together. You know, these things always appear like they took a couple of minutes, yesterday to throw together. And we all know that great events that they're well executed usually is because there's tons of planning that's gone on. And so I want to thank the YWCAs of Alberta, the communications and fundraising staff who came together to bring this event to life. This was a first for us. So it's always a little daunting when you go out there and put yourself out there, but it certainly won't be the last because this has been incredibly engaging. So thank you as well to the Calgary Chamber for your partnership in bringing this event to life. And finally to our audience for taking the time to be curious, to learn new ideas, and hopefully you've been inspired to take action on gender diversity in your business, in the local economies, and in our province. Certainly what gender diversity brings to the table is part of diversification of the economy. They go hand in hand. And so we look forward to seeing you all soon over the coming months. The YWs have a number of activities and events. Follow us on Twitter and other social media. A couple of the events that are upcoming is YW Banff's Vine Art auction is taking place on March 25th. And YW Calgary's 10th anniversary of our Y Whisper Gala, 10 years, will be happening on March 11th. YW Edmonton's Searching for Izina campaign to commemorate the first female city councillor continues. What an interesting way to advocate. And so it's really interesting. Need to lean in on that if you haven't been following YW Edmonton's work. As well as YWCA Lethbridge will be hosting its 45th annual Women of Distinction Awards on March 5th. So please do take a moment wherever you are. We appreciate your support, all the YWs. And thank you again to our panelists and to you, Lara, and to everybody who leaned in and took your lunch hour today to join us. And we look forward to seeing you again. So thank you all and be well.
Thank you.